Hi everyone, it's Miss Marrugi here, ready to read to you the next chapters from Jerry Spinelli's Maniac Magee. Now before we begin reading, I'd like to go over our scale for the day. And today we're talking about prediction. And prediction is a guess that the reader makes based off of the clues in the text. Now when we make a prediction, we use evidence from the text and our schema, and schema is prior knowledge that we bring to the reading, and we combine those two things to predict on what may happen next in the story. And again, prediction is when you take the information from the source, and in this case it's Maniac Magee, along with your personal schema, and personal schema is the information and knowledge you knew prior to reading. So you combine those two things to make a prediction based on what you think may happen next in the story. Today we are reading chapters 37 to 40, and these are the words that we are going to look out for. Our first word is feats, and feats are extraordinary acts of achievement. Our next word is perilous, and that's hazardous or dangerous. Our next word is forlorn, which means to be unhappy or miserable. Our next word is marooned, which is to abandon. And finally, we've got ludicrous, which means something that's ridiculous or laughable. When we left Jeffrey, he had spent some time at the McNab house. He and the older McNab son got along much better after Jeffrey brought home the two younger McNab boys that had ran away from home, and that's Russell and Piper. So when he brought them home, the older McNab son that Jeffrey has not gone along with throughout the entire book felt like he appreciated what Jeffrey had done, and so he had spent time with the McNab family. So now we need to see if he's going to continue living with the McNab family. He kind of thought about the Beale family throughout the last chapters and how different that house was from the McNab family, and also the home he and Grayson had created for themselves. And so now we're going to dive into chapter 37 to learn more about where Maniac Magee continues his story. Thus began a series of heroic feats by Maniac Magee. At 20 paces, he hit a telephone pole with a stone 61 times in a row. When the once-a-week freight train hit Elm Street, he started running from the Oriole Street dead end, one rail, and beat the train to the park. No sweat. He took off his sneaks and socks and walked, nonchalant as you please, through the rat-infested dump at the foot of Racco Hill. The mysterious hole down by the creek, the one you could never reach into, even if you dropped your most valuable possession into it. He stuck his hand in, his arm in, all the way to the elbow, kept it there for the longest 60 seconds on record, and pulled it out dirty, but still full of fingers. He climbed the fence at the American bison pen at the zoo. He had suggested this feat himself. Everyone else scaffing, and while the mother looked on, kissed the baby buffalo. So it went through February and March of that year, a feat a week. To much of the town hearing about these things, it was simply a case of the legend adding to itself, doing what legends do. To Russell and Piper McNab, it was a case of boasting their importance even higher in the eyes of the other kids. Was it not at the brothers' direction that Maniac Magee performed these deeds? And who, after all, is the more amazing, the lion or the tamer? As for Maniac, he understood early on that he was being used for the greater glory of Piper and Russell. He also understood that without him, they would not be going to school every day. For the McNabs, there was Nothing free about public education. The tuition had to be paid. Every week, Maniac paid it. And besides, he loved to meet the challenges they cooked up for him. And then one day, they gave him the most perilous challenge of all. They dared him to go to the East End. Chapter 38. The witnesses there were twice 15 their time. Even with him as far as Hector Street, they halted at the curb. He crossed the street and went on alone. Piper megaphoned after him. Maniac, come on. He was just kidding. You don't have to. Maniac just waved and went on. He knew he should be feeling afraid of the East Enders, these so-called black people. But he wasn't. It was himself that he was afraid of any trouble he might cause just by being there. It was the day of the worms, that first almost warm after the rainy night day in April, when you bolt from your house to find yourself in a world of worms. They were as numerous here in the East End as they were in the West. The sidewalks, the streets, the very places where they didn't belong, forlorn, marooned on concrete and asphalt, no place to burrow. April's orphans. Once, when he was little in Hollinsburg, he had gone along with this toy wheelbarrow, carefully lifting them with a borrowed kitchen fork until the burrow was filled, then dumped them into Mr. Snarley's compost pile. And sure, as the worms followed the rain, the kids followed the worms. West End, East End, they had poured from their houses onto the cool, damp sidewalks. And if they gave the worms any notice, it was only when they squashed one underfoot. And so, as Maniac moved through the East End, he felt the presence of not one, but two populations, both occupying the same territory, yet each unmindful of the other. One yelping and playing and chasing and laughing, the other lost and silent and dying by the millions. Yo, fish belly, Maniac snapped to. He glanced at a street sign. He was 4 blocks from Hector, deep in the east. Mars Bar came dip-jiving towards him, taller than before, bigger, but still scrawling. Hey, fish, thought you was gone. Maniac turned to face him fully. Mars Bar did not stop till he was inside Maniac's phone booth space, inches from his face. They locked eyes. Maniac thinking, I must be growing too. He said, I'm back. The scrawl fiercened. Maybe nobody told you. I'm badder than ever. I'm getting badder every day. I'm almost afraid to wake up in the morning. He leaned in closer, 'cause how bad I ought to be getting overnight. Maniac smiled, nodded. Yeah, you're bad, Mars. He gave a sniff. His smile went a little smirky. And I'm getting so bad myself, I think I must be half black. Mars' eyes bulged. He backed off. The scroll collapsed and he hollered with laughter. His buddies, who were hanging back, stared dumbly. As Mars, unwounded from his laughter fit, he studied Maniac up and down, aware too that Maniac was studying him. When he could speak again, he said, Still, them raggedy clothes, huh, fish? He lifted one foot, posed. I see ya looking. Like them kicks? Just got 'em. Maniac nodded. Nice. They were more than nice. They were beautiful. The best, yes, the baddest sneaks he had ever seen. Way better than anything Grayson could have afforded. I forgot to tell you something else too, fish. What's that? I'm fast. I'm faster. I've been working out. Got my new boss kicks. He sprinted in place, arms and legs pistoning to a blur. He stopped. He jabbed a finger at Maniac's nose, pressed it, flattening the soft end of it. See, Guess you were right. Now at least you got a black nose. He laughed. They both laughed. Everyone laughed. Then Mars turned slowly again, saying, but you ain't black enough or bad enough to be the Mars man. We're gonna race, honky donkey. The race was set up on Plum Street, the long level block between Ash and Jackson. By the time they were ready, half the kids in the East End were there. From the tiniest pipsqueaks to high schoolers. The little kids ran races of their own from curb to curb. The bigger kids shouldered, blasted, and dug into their jeans for coins to bet with. For the first time since last fall, mothers opened windows and leaned out from second stories. Traffic was detoured from both ends of the block. No one could find strength for the finish. So a second-story mother dropped down a spool of bright pink thread. Another problem was the start. First, they had to find chalk to draw the starting line. Then nobody could seem to draw it straight. The result, a stack of starting lines creeping up the street, till someone brought out a yardstick and did it right. The next problem came when the starter, Bump Gilliam, who was also Mars Bar's best pal, called, "Get ready." And someone in the crowd yelled, "That ain't what you say. You say, take your mark." Well, everybody jumped into it then. There was shoving and drawing and almost a fistfight over the proper way to start a race. Finally, there was a compromise, and Bump called, "Get ready, on your mark," at which point someone else called, "Go Mars," and Bump turned and snarled, "Shut up. When the starter starts, there's no noise." So naturally, someone else called, "Smoke 'em Mars," and then came, "Waste 'em Mars," and "Do the honk, Marbar." And they might still be calling to this day had not a single voice separated itself from the others. "Burn 'em, McGee." It was hands down, laughing and pointing from his perch on the roof of a car. Bump jumped into get-up. Let's get set and go. And as long last, mosey from their weight at the starting line, they went. Even as the race began, even after it began, Maniac wasn't sure how to run it. Naturally, he wanted to win, or at least do his best. But his instincts told him that. But there were other considerations whom he was racing against, and where, and what the consequences might be if he won. These were heavy considerations, heavy enough to slow him down, until the hysterical crowd and the sight of Mars Bar's sneaker bottoms and the boiling of his own blood ignited his afterburners, and before you could say, "Burn 'em, McGee," he was afraid, the pink thread bobbing in his sight. But he never saw his body break the thread. He saw only the face of Mars Bar, straining, gasping, unbelieving, losing. They were crazy. They were wild. They were totally bananas. You see him? He turned around. He ran backwards. He did it backwards? He beat, going backwards. Mars Bar tried. He shoved, bumped. "You started too fast. I wasn't ready." He shoved the thread holder. "You moved it up so he could win. I was gaining on him." He shoved Maniac. "You bumped me. You got a false start. You cheated." But his protest drowned in the pandemonium. "Why did I do it?" was all Maniac could think. He hadn't even realized it till he crossed the line, and he regretted it instantly. Wasn't it enough just to win? Did he have to disgrace his opponent as well? He had done it deliberately to pay back Mars Bar for all his nastiness, to show him up and shut him up once and for all. His only recollection was a feeling of sheer, joyful exuberance himself in a celebration, shouting Amen in the Bethany church, bashing John McNab's fastballs out of sight, dancing polka with Grayson. Maybe it was that simple. After all, who asked why the outer down mud banks? But that didn't make it any less stupid or rotten a thing to do. The hatred in Mars Bar's eyes was no longer for a white kid in the East End. It was for Jeffrey Magee, period. The crowd surged with him as he made his way westward. It wasn't clear whether they were glad or not that he had won, only that they had seen somebody to set them off. They jammed and high-fived and jived. For everyone who called him White Lightning, 2 more challenged him to race. Right here, baby, you and me. See who's gonna turn his back on who. Maniac kept moving, embarrassed, wishing he could just break out and sprint for the West End, wishing he could duck into the Beals' house and not fear there. And just about then, miraculously, 2 little hands were worming into his, 2 familiar voices squealing. Maniac, Maniac, Hester and Lester. He snatched them up, 1 in each arm. He was on Sycamore Street. There was the house, the door opening, Amanda, Mrs. Beale, smiling to beat the band. Chapter 39. During the night, March doubled back and dabbed April by the snuff of the neck and flung it another week or 2 down the road. When Maniac slipped silently from the house at dawn, the only way he'd ever managed to get away, March pounced with cold and nasty paws. But Maniac wasn't minding. The reunion had been ecstatic and tearful and nonstop happy, and inside he was pure July. He was half a block up Sycamore before he stopped tiptoeing. Minutes later, he crossed Hector. The street was dry. An occasional scrap of chewed rawhide was all that remained of the worms. Hours later, Russell and Piper spotted him 3 blocks off. Maniac, you're alive. We thought they got you. We thought they slit your throat. We thought they strangled you and pulled your tongue out. We thought they chopped your head off and boiled you. Yeah, boiled you. And drunk your blood. Yeah, and drunk your brains. Yeah. Don't drink brains, you moron meatball. Yeah, you do. Brains like milkshakes. Like Dairy Queen. You can drink them with a straw. You can hear them sloshing if you shake your head hard enough. Listen. Hey, get off my head. Hey, help. They were off and running. Maniac couldn't help laughing. In spite of their twisted, ludicrous impression of EastEnders, the concern and the tears in their eyes had been genuine. They had really missed him. They had really been afraid for him. 2 houses away, he could hear the thump, almost feel it. And Father George McNab's voice, lay him down easy, I said, easy, followed by son John, this easy enough, thump, followed by a string of curses from George McNab that fried the cold morning like an egg. The living room was hazy with dust. As the back end of the dining room, they were bringing in the cinder blocks, George and John and a handful of cobras, lugging and grunting them in from the backyard and dumping them onto the floor. Thump, thump. Hey, kid, George McNab was pointing through the haze. 3 months, and he still didn't know his tenant's name. Get your little hide over here. Start lugging these. Maniac waved. Later. Gotta go. He shut the door and headed up the street. So they were really doing it. He had heard them planning it for weeks, making drawings, buying or stealing cement, trowels, a level, a pillbox, they called it. Once it was done, they'd be ready. Let the revolt begin. Let the rebels, as they called the EastEnders, come. Let them bust through the newly installed bars over the plywood on the windows. Let them bust through the steel door. They'll find themselves staring down the barrel of a little surprise. They squabbled over what surprise should be. Bazooka. Why? Maniac had also asked Giant John one day. Why what? Why are you doing all this? To get ready. What else? Well, what do you think is going to happen? What's going to happen? Giant John squatted a squad of roaches from the kitchen table and sat down. What's going to happen is one of these they're going to revolt. Who says? Who cares who says? You think they're going to make an announcement? Maniac tried to picture Amanda and Hester and Lester and Bow Wow storming the barricades. When's all this supposed to happen? John shrugged. You never know. Maybe this summer? He jumped up, grabbed a beer from the fridge, flipped it open. They like to revolt in the summer. Make it itchy. They like to overrun the cities. This time we'll be ready. And he told Maniac what he often imagined, lying in bed, and black sweeping across Hector, one steaming summer night. Torches, chains, blades, guns, war cries, looting, overrunning the West Enders, climbing in through, smashing windows, doors, looking for whites, bloodthirsty for whites, like Indians in the old days. Indians on a raid. That's what they are, Giant John nodded thoughtfully. Today's Indians. The cockroach strolling up his pant leg wasn't the only thing making Maniac feel crawly. He shook off the roach. He moved to the center of the kitchen to surround himself with as much space as possible. But other people, he said, I don't hear them talking about revolts. Nobody else wants to make a pillbox. Giant John tilted the last of the beer in his mouth. Maybe when we do, he grinned, they will. That had been weeks before, and now the pillbox was underway. No longer an idea in the backyard, but a reality in the dining room. Now, there was no room that Maniac could stand in the middle of and feel clean. Now there was something else in the house, and it smelled worse than garbage and turds. Chapter 40. He ran far that day, away from the town, letting the wind wash him. When he returned to the West End, he heard it in the distance. Mrs. Pickwell whistling her children to dinner. Though he had heard the whistle many times, he had not answered it since his first day in town. Now he felt, as he had that day, that it was meant for him. This time, of course, there was a difference. He was no stranger. He was Maniac Magee, the kid who had walked barefoot through the dump near their house. The Pickwell kids cheered when he showed up and treated him like a legend in the flesh. Mrs. Pickwell did better. She treated him like a family member, as if she would have been surprised if he hadn't come on the whistle. Nor was Maniac the only visitor for dinner. Mr. Pickwell had brought home a down and out of shoe salesman in sore need of sympathy and a good meal. As Maniac ate in the talk and laughter his way through the dinner, he couldn't help thinking of the Beals, How alike the two families were, friendly, giving, accepting. So easily he could picture the Beals' brown faces around this dinner table, and the little Pickwell kids' white bodies in the bathtub at 728 Sycamore. Whoever had made of Hector Street a barrier, it was surely not these people. Fortified by his good time at the Pickwells, Maniac returned to the McNabs. After the East End scare, Russell and Piper no longer demanded stunts of him in return for attending school. On the one hand, this was a relief to Maniac. On the other, it left him with less influence over them. He could always extort a day or two in class from them with the free weekly pizza. Beyond that, he guided them toward school any way he could. He organized a marbles tournament that could take place only in the schoolyard during recess. He tried reading to them as he had to Hester and Lester and to Grayson, but they paid as much attention as the Roaches. He took them to the library, then scrapped that idea after their shenanigans left the librarian blundering and blue-faced. Then May arrived with its warm weather and blew away what little power he had left. The boys began again to dream of travel. Wood appeared in the backyard. They were building a raft. Going to sail down the river to the ocean, they said. One day he heard frenzied horn honking and screaming. He turned to see an ancient, rusty gas hog convertible rolling up, with Russell behind the wheel and Piper jumping up and down and streaking in the back seat. By the time Maniac caught up, they were gone, and the car was shuddering against a telephone pole. Another time, he had to run them down and haul them back to Dorsey's Groceries, where he made them empty their bulging pocket of the 50 bubble gum they had stolen. It was maddening, chaotic time for Maniac. Running in the mornings and reading in the afternoons gave him just enough stability to ensure the zany nights at the McNabs. When he asked himself why he didn't just drop them, the answer was never clear. It wasn't so much that he wanted to stay as that he couldn't go. In some vague way, to abandon the McNab boys would be to abandon something in himself. He couldn't shake the suspicion that deep inside Russell and Piper McNab, in the prior dark seed of their kidhoods, they were identical to Hester and Lester Beale. But they were spoiling, rotting from the outside in, like a pair of peaches in the sun. Soon, unless somebody did something, the rot would reach the pit. And yet he held back. Oh, he prodded and persuaded and inspired and bribed the boys to do right. But he never forced them, never commanded, never shouted, because to do so would be parental, and he was not yet ready for that. How could he act as a father to these boys when he himself ached to be somebody's son? But then one day the boys went too far. He found them playing with the old glove Grayson had given him for Christmas. As if that weren't bad enough, they were using it as a football, punting it back and forth. Maniac exploded. He popped off for a good 10 minutes, got it all out. This was the last straw, he told them. From now on, it was going to be different. No more Mr. Nice Guy. When I say jump, you say how high. Got it? They got it. For the first time in their lives, the boys were speechless as they did their homework that night, speechless as they went to bed at 9 o'clock, speechless as they went off to school next morning. The peace lasted 3 days. Shock accounted for the first day. The second and third days were a new game called Obedience and Being Good. When the game lost its appeal, Maniac lost his power. He told them to sit, they stood. He told them to stand, they sat. Instead of going to school, they worked on their raft. Instead of doing homework, they played war in the pillbox. They brought their plastic weapons down from the hole and stationed themselves at the 2 small gunnery slots in the cinder block wall and blasted away at anyone moving through the house, not to mention imaginary rebels streaming through the door and over the windowsills. "Stop," Maniac finally yelled, and snatched the 2 barrels from the slots. In a moment, 2 more barrels appeared. "Stop," he commanded. "Ain't shooting you," Russell whined. "We're shooting the rebels. Bam, bam, bam. Got another. Bam, bam. I said stop." Maniac grabbed the guns, threw them on the floor, and stomped on them. He didn't stop till they were plastic splinters. The only sound was that of the turtle scratching somewhere in the room. The gunnery slots framed the boys' dumbstruck faces. Russell was the first to speak. "Get out of my house." "Yeah," sneered Piper. "Out of here." Maniac went upstairs, got his satchel, and was gone. That night and the next night, he slept at the park. The following day, as he sat reading in the library, in came the McNab boys. They rushed to him. "Hey, Maniac," blurted Piper. "We've been looking all over for you. You got to come to my birthday party. I'm having a party tomorrow." "What do you say, huh? You're coming, huh?" Maniac couldn't believe it. The ugly feeling of the other day showed nowhere on their excited faces. "Come on, Maniac, you gotta." And just like that, as he stared at them, the idea came. An idea as zany as they were. The words seemed to lift right off their faces like sunburnt skin peeling. "Well, okay," he said, "on one condition." "What's that?" "If I can bring someone with me." "Sure, bring everybody. We're going to party." The librarian edged closer to the phone. So, that takes us to chapter 41, and that's going to be actually our last reading before we conclude the story. It was very disappointing to read how racist the McNab father was towards Black people and how paranoid he was about anyone different from him to coming into his city. And I'm glad to see that Maniac had left the house, but I'm curious to know if he's going to go back in the home and go and attend this party now, and who he's going to take with him, because he did ask if he could bring a guest. So try to make your prediction on who his guest will be, and if he's going to be able to, if he's going to go to the party, one, and who his guest is going to be, two. So I'm still crossing my finger that he will end up with the Beale family. Of course, nothing is guaranteed, but I can't wait till the next reading when we find out more about Maniac Magee and his adventures. I hope you enjoyed today's reading, and I'll see you next time. Good night for now.